Resuming debate, the honourable member for Caribou, Prince George.
Oh, fantastic.
Thank you.
That's a good choice. That's a good choice.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleagues for the rousing round of support.
Love you, Todd.
Yeah, love you too. Hi, Ms. Melly. Mr. Speaker, what brought us here today? Yet another day, yet another scandal of this this government. You know, it's not that long ago, well, it's 9 years ago, it seems like a long time ago, when the member from Papineau was campaigning to be the next Prime Minister of our country, that he told Canadians that under his governance that Canadians would see the most open and transparent government in the history of our country, that sunshine would be the disinfectant, the best disinfectant. Sunny ways, I believe he said. Sunny ways are brought back to this country. Most open and transparent government, Mr. Speaker. And what have we seen in the last 9 years? Elbowgate, cash for access scandal, Agacon, cultural appropriation, Gropegate, sole source contracts. Let us not, this is like a best hits, a KTEL best hits. The WE scandal, clam scam. And I'll remind those Canadians that are paying attention, all those that are in the gallery today, what the clam scam was is that the former fisheries minister, now the Minister of Public Safety and Security, and our Prime Minister's most trusted confidant, awarded a contract to a group that was being managed by a cousin or a brother-in-law of that minister. The company was also ran by a former Liberal minister and the brother of a sitting Liberal member of Parliament, essentially taking almost 500 jobs from the town of Grand Bank in Newfoundland and awarding it to another group. Luckily, we exposed it and we were able to get those jobs back for the town of Grand Bank. And I still get letters of support and thanks because we were the only ones that stood up for that town. The only ones that stood up for that town. Mr. Speaker, time and again we've seen the Prime Minister and his ministers evade accountability. It's always somebody else's problem. It's always somebody else's fault. It's scandal after scandal, corruption after corruption. Winnipeg Labs scandal, GC Strategies, 72 secret orders in council, skipping the very first Truth and Reconciliation Day to go surfing in Tofino. That's what our Prime Minister did. This is the Prime Minister that stood when he was the member of Papineau campaigning to be the next Prime Minister with his hand in his heart and said that reconciliation and relationships with our Indigenous people was the most important relationship for that government. And what have we seen from that time? Well, I remember that Prime Minister standing up and thanking Indigenous protesters for their donation when all they were asking for was clean water, drinking water in their communities. $6,000 a night hotels in London for the Queen's funeral. We saw some of our worst criminals, Paul Bernardo, Luca Bagnotta, prison transfers under the darkness of night, transferred from our most secure prisons to our medium security prisons. And one of the most recent ones, this government bought a $9 million condo for the Prime Minister's friend in New York City. We should never forget the Where's Randy? The other Randy, where a company owned and ran by one of the ministers here, Mr. Speaker, who happens to have a first name Randy, and his partner, so a two-person company, also received millions of dollars of federal funding. which all kind of disappeared and lots of kerfuffle around it, but there was discussions between the two partners, and well, the one partner that was called before the House or committee to testify said it was another Randy, but he couldn't remember the name of that Randy, or was he not going to provide the other Randy's last name. From lavish vacations with wealthy donors, this government has repeatedly violated public trust and lost the moral authority to govern. And now for why we are here today. Mr. Speaker, this House, all those who sit in this House are elected by the people, elected by Canadians. All 338 members of us are all elected to be the voice of Canadians who elect us. This is the House of Commons. It's a people's house. So when the House mandates that something is done, well, you would think that the Prime Minister would follow, or the Prime Minister and ministers would follow those orders. The SDTC is a federally funded not-for-profit that approves and disperses millions of dollars in funds annually to clean technology companies. The Sustainable Development Technology Canada was established in 2001 by the Government of Canada through the Canada Foundation for Sustainable Development Technology Act to fund the development and demonstration of new technologies that promote sustainable development. It is an arm's-length, not-for-profit organization that was created to support projects that develop, demonstrate new technologies that address issues related to climate change, air quality, clean water, and clean soil. It should be noted that in 2017, the SDTC received a clean bill of health. That all the findings at that point was that everything was above board. Then along came this Prime Minister and his ministers, and they elected hand-picked board members, hand-picked the chair, who then proceeded to spend $1 billion, almost $1 billion of taxpayer funds. And about 186 of those fundings, or that fundings, there was 186 times that the Auditor General found conflicts of interest, meaning those board of directors and that chair handpicked where those projects were going, or where that funding was going. Some of that funding went to their very own companies, Mr. Speaker.
Shameful.
So this House ordered an investigation, ordered the papers to be delivered so that the RCMP could have a look to see if indeed there was some criminality involved in that. That's an order from the Speaker. It's an order from this House. And what the Prime Minister did and ordered was that those papers would be delivered, but they'd be heavily redacted so that no investigation could be done. It begs the question, Mr. Speaker, what are they hiding? What more are they hiding? You know, up to that point, the SDTC continued to operate, but all of a sudden their annual reports have ceased. They're refusing to answer the questions. Over $330 million of taxpayers' money was directed to companies where the very board members who approved the funding had clear conflicts of interest. Additionally, the Auditor General found that the board authorized another $59 million in projects that were beyond the Foundation's legal mandate. The Prime Minister's hand-picked board members, including its chair, found themselves in positions where they could directly benefit their own companies. We mentioned that. Funneling taxpayers' dollars, unaccounted for, unchecked, to their own companies. 9 directors were found by the Auditor General responsible for the 186 conflicts of interest. Unbelievable, Mr. Speaker. And so Conservatives want to get to the bottom of this. We want to hold this government accountable. And it's only the Conservatives that are standing up and doing this. So through you, Mr. Speaker, the Canadian people deserve to know how their money has been misused. This NDP Liberal government must finally be held accountable for the actions of its hand-picked appointees, and the Conservatives will be the ones that do it.
Bravo. Order. It's my duty pursuant to Standing Order 38 to inform the House that the questions we raised tonight at the time of adjournment are as follows. The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park for Saskatchewan, Public Services and Procurement. The Honourable Member for Langley Aldergrove on mental health and addictions. And the Honourable Member for Dufferin-Caledon on carbon pricing. Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's important to be very clear on the fact that the Conservative Party is blurring the whole issue of judicial independence. In fact, in the last question I asked, the member had indicated, the member from Brantford-Brant, the Conservative said, well, we are assisting the RCMP. And that's how they justify giving this information directly, summoning it, then giving it directly to the RCMP. We are assisting. One could say you're on a slippery slope. Are you next going to assist the RCMP by suggesting they arrest someone? Or the justice system that they should put someone in jail? What a slippery slope the Conservative Party is taking in terms of taking an affront to the Canadian Charter of Rights. The only Conservative parliamentarian that I'm aware of that actually went to jail was the former Dean Del Mastro, who actually was the parliamentary secretary to the Stephen Harper. Is that where they're getting their constitutional directions from?
The Honourable Member for Peterborough, Prince George.
186 conflicts of interest, Mr. Speaker, and this member of Parliament wants to stand up and point fingers, just like they do all the time. It wasn't us or the Conservatives or worse. They're not going to take any blame, Mr. Speaker. That's all they do. Don't look here. There's nothing to see here. 186 conflicts of interest, over $390 million. Taxpayer funds.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Bloc Québécois supports the motion in principle, but what bothers me is the wording, Mr. Speaker. The Conservative motion. Can the member start again? We want to make sure that interpretation is working. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean can start from the beginning. Well, Mr. Speaker, as I was saying, the Bloc Québécois supports the principle of the motion, but what bothers us is the wording. This motion does relate to poor management of SDTC, and it's important to address that, but the wording is problematic because the motion calls for all documents to be tabled within 14 days, which is totally unrealistic. And here's why it's unrealistic. When the government tables documents to Parliament, they must do so in English and in French. Translation would take longer than the 14 days that are set out in the motion. So, does the Conservative motion seek rather to put the government in a situation where they're in contempt of Parliament, which would create a political drama? Because the motion, we agree with it in principle, but these documents, all these documents, they cannot be translated in 14 days. So it seems that they're not really considering the Official Languages Act.
No, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate my honourable colleague's question, but I will draw him to the original order of this House, which was back in June 10th, which would have provided enough time, 30 days, enough time for those documents to be produced, and yet we still have not seen them.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for New Westminster, Burnaby.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as my colleague knows, the NDP is supporting the motion. We believe in getting to the bottom of the STTC scandal. The reality is the misspending is something that needs to be explored, and we absolutely believe in that transparency. Whether it's a Liberal scandal or a Conservative scandal, we also thank the Auditor General's Department for having exposed the possible misspending. Now, you'll recall, Mr. Speaker, under the Harper regime, Conservatives slashed the funding to the Auditor General and to the Parliamentary Budgetary Officer. In other words, constraining the ability of those independent officers of Parliament to actually do their job. And we saw the results. Conservatives, we lived through a number of Conservative scandals under the Harper regime that Conservatives blocked investigations on. The anti-terrorism funding, $3.1 billion, with absolutely no paper trail. The Phoenix Pay System, $2.2 billion. We continue to pay for that today. The F-35 procurement scandal, this G8 spending, $1 billion. ATS scandal, $400 million. That's not even including the Senate scandals, not even including all of the other scandals that we saw over this period, including Conservative members of Parliament, at least in one case, going to jail. My question is, Mr. Speaker, to my honourable colleague, is why Conservatives blocked all of that transparency, refused the investigations, refused to actually have Canadians know the truth about Conservative scandals.
The honourable member for Caribou Prince George.
Well, I would remind my honourable colleague from the NDP that this is not only this government's record. They have supported and propped up this government for the last 5.5, 6 years. So this is also their record of scandal and corruption.